Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much, Adison, for this invitation, and Dean Anuchat, you're somewhere, and everyone in its faculty. I always feel very honored when I'm invited by the Learning Sciences Department of Thammasat because there are such bright, promising people there that I feel they want to talk to me some more. That's a very reassuring thought. So thank you. But also it makes me think again about the work that I'm doing and how to connect with something that you are doing and how to rethink what I am doing. So I thank you again for that provocation and that invitation, and to hear stories such as we have just heard, which is very inspiring. For me as an educator, the question after I hear someone like Anil talk is, why don't we have more people like this? You know, it's always a question. What is it that our system of education lacks such that there aren't enough people who are thinking in these ways? So on that note, I want to consider this idea of learning to play again and why we need to learn to play again. And so these are some reflections that I want to share with you and then hopefully invite dialogue. So last Sunday, when I was thinking about this paper, I happened to catch a documentary on the television about Afghanistan. And a psychologist trying to deal with issues of mental health in Afghanistan, people who are suffering from the trauma of war. Understandably, post-traumatic stress disorder, anxiety disorder, all kinds of unseen and silent destruction. We often see images of the physical destruction, bomb explosion and people bleeding on the news, and that tends to be the image of Afghanistan that we are left with time and time again unless we have been there. And this was reminding me about how this question of mental health is very often a response to a war. I live in Singapore, a very different kind of place to Afghanistan, where there has not been a war since World War II, Japanese occupation, and that was when bombs were last dropped on Singapore. And Singapore is clean, it's orderly. In fact, it's so clean and orderly that yes, we have just had the meeting of two very unorderly people. Yes, who are talking about denuclearization in very bizarre, strange ways in Singapore. Now, why Singapore is another story, and what other country would they have gone to if Singapore said no is another question. But in this very orderly and very neat and very law-abiding country, there are questions about mental health that are growing. It's a different kind of war that we are having to face and that we don't always acknowledge as present. It's even more silent, more unseen perhaps. Now, while all the preparation for Trump and Kim to come and have a peace summit in Singapore was happening, two celebrities took their own lives, right? Kate Spade, Anthony Bourdain. One related to fashion, another one related to food. And these are global celebrities, and so the story emerges. But on a daily basis in Singapore, a lot of young people are trying to end their life. The suicide rate is growing, attempted and both successful, and we don't get the official figures because they're probably very, very high. Right? So this is something like in East Asia, in Japan and South Korea, where the pressure to achieve and be successful is so high, it is creating very serious trouble and trauma amongst young people. So how do I, as a drama educator, as a facilitator, as a dramaturg, attempt to even think it through, respond to it, and approach it? I won't go so far as to say I do something to transform it, but how do I even approach it to kind of figure out what's going on? So what do? In Singapore, I teach drama in the National Institute of Education, as Adison has said. But drama is not part of the curriculum, so I'm very often a facilitator for people who want to use drama as a subject and as a pedagogy. And I'm also a dramaturg, I work in theatre. And very recently, one of the things that has become evident and something that has become even a topic of interest and comment from the minister is that students in Singapore are suffering very, very high levels of anxiety. So this very successful education system, people come from different parts of the world to study the Singapore education system, is creating such high levels of stress in Singapore that the numbers exceed many other countries. And so what is the price of success, and what are some of the questions that need to be asked in relation to this? One of the things that the new Minister of Education in Singapore has said is that we need to remove or alleviate or reduce stress. And one of the comments that he makes is that we need to make sure that it's okay if you don't do so well. Now, what that comment says to me is that right now he's admitting that for many people, if you don't do well, the price is very, very high. And the outcome of that do or die mentality is very serious. Systems need to change, obviously. And the process of pushing people to understand why systems need to change is the question that I have. What is it that's going to convince people that this approach to education is at a very high cost? So another outcome of this very high stress and high anxiety environment is that many parents and many students feel that going to school is not enough and they have to go for private tuition. So that 40% of preschoolers, children in kindergarten, are going for at least 2 hours of tuition. That's something very wrong. That's something very painful for the parents, for the teachers, in the schools who are pushing the parents to send the children to tuition, and for the children themselves. And this leads to some significant consequences, of course. Children don't play. Children don't have time to spend in open, rough and tumble play. I'm not talking about video games. I'm not talking about competitive sport. I'm talking about space where children can just be with each other and spend time doing things that have no prescribed outcome, that are not judged for how good or bad they are, and that allow the imagination and the sensibility of the child to be open, to work with other people through play, to connect with other people through play, and to connect with themselves. This is seen now in a lot of spaces that have this kind of high pressure environment as a waste of time. Stop playing and go and study. Stop playing and go and work. Because play is seen as counterproductive. It's going to lead to ineffectiveness, it's going to lead to inefficiency, and there's a whole range of problems associated with that. Now, I'm not going to go into all the kinds of theories of play, because there are many. And play has been talked about for centuries as an aspect of the human being that is very crucial to understanding your relationship with people in your community and in your society, and now increasingly to help you understand the stranger, the so-called other, the person you've never met before, whom we have to deal with more and more. Play is also well researched in neuroscience as crucial for a child's development of the brain. In the first 5 years, the child's development depends largely on play, and you don't have to teach children how to play. Children play because they're curious and they understand that that's how you learn. You're curious about the world, you want to find out. And linked to that curiosity is your process of discovery, which is a sheer pleasure. Even if you get your hands burnt, even if you get scolded for falling into the mud again, The point is, when you fell into the mud, it was sheer pleasure. And when you were going up to the fire to touch it, it was pleasure. And then, of course, it got burnt. And then you realize, okay, there's pain afterwards. But these processes for a child are being stripped away. And if we don't allow a child to discover, to be curious and discover, and we're telling them in school all the time, this is what you do, this is what you learn, this is how you learn it, and this is how you will produce the answer that will get you 100 marks in the exam, which is what largely education has become about, then this capacity of the mind to be open and to imagine and to understand the world from a different point of view is seriously lacking. Now, the question of play is not one in which you can do anything you like with no responsibility. I'm talking about play here as an attitude, as an approach, as a way of being and as a way of becoming, which means a way of understanding that you could be doing anything. You could be cooking and it could be play. You could be filing reports and it could be play if you're curious about what is happening while you're doing it. Because one of the crucial aspects of play is that it cannot be forced. So if somebody forces you to play, you are doing the task but you're not playing. Because you no longer are interested in what you're doing and you're doing it because somebody tells you to do it, so it becomes an exercise. And we know enough about that. You know, you sometimes go for an event, they tell you we got to play games now and you really don't want to play, but you play anyway. It happens, it's okay. But I'm talking about a space in which the work that you do, what you spend your time doing, is filled with your own curiosity and your own exploration. Because it serves you and it serves the people around you. So when we think about play and work, I don't want to separate them and say that when you're working, you cannot be in play mode, and when you're playing, it means you have to abandon your work. I'm talking about an approach, right? And I think that increasingly, we have to ask ourselves this question, and I have to ask myself this question, because I understand my role as an educator, as a dramaturg, as a facilitator, sometimes is really messed up by the fact that I only see it as work. I only see it as completing the task that I have to complete. And now my list of things to do is no longer on pretty note paper because pretty note paper is too small. I have to use A4. That's not a good sign. But I think that this question for leaders, for teachers whom I consider leaders, for educators whom I consider leaders, is crucial because if we don't learn how to play and keep playing and play again and again and again, then even if we're trying to encourage and facilitate young people through processes of play, then it's not going to be out of a sense of commitment and conviction, and it's not going to come out of a sensibility that says, I want to play while you're playing too. And people read us. They read our capacity to go, okay, I got to make you play because that's my job. My work is to make you play, but I ain't going to play because it's seriously a waste of time. And these are the kinds of tensions. There are tensions in the education system, particularly where I come from. Because if I apply for leave to go on vacation, I'm allowed to play. But if I say I'm working and what I'm doing right now is playing, most people don't understand. I'm a theatre person, so they think, okay, you theatre people are like this. And I'm very fortunate because I work officially in the Nanyang Playhouse, which is the theatre where I work, right? But for most people, that's sort of, yeah, okay, you know, artists, they tend to play a bit. However, I think we have to also recognize that if we don't play enough as adults and as children, the consequences are quite serious. And Stuart Brown has done research on longitudinal studies that look at how people who've got a lack of play or play deprivation actually have a higher tendency toward criminal behavior. Violence, aggression, inability to control behavior is linked. and people who have got healthy, sufficient amounts of good, strong play cope with stress better. And these are studies that are scientifically analyzed. Okay? Not yet brain theory as yet, although I think we'll get there soon enough. So this capacity to be a human being that is able to take on the different stresses of our society and the demands of a world that is changing but also very threatening means that we actually need to learn to play. Now, one of the things about play is that when you play, you know you're playing a role. Not just in theatre for the stage, but you're playing a role. And you know that this role doesn't encompass your whole life. And when you finish playing that role, you go on to something else, you go on to something else. Now, this is an area of work that is becoming more crucial because in the Singapore context, there are real problems faced by employers nowadays who are finding that young people find it very difficult to keep their job or to stay in the job because they find it very difficult to work with people. So when they did a small survey about what do young people need in order to cope with the workplace and be resilient, which is another buzzword, they found that many of them really just wanted to understand how to work with different cultures, how to deal with different personalities, how to be adaptable and present. I read this notion of wanting to be attractive as being present, and how to cope with difficulty and change. Now, if you play on the playground, you learn it. You learn it because otherwise you can't play on the playground. You don't know who's going to come on the playground. You don't know who's going to be leading that day. You don't know what game people are going to play. You can't be in charge all the time on the playground. You have to give and take, otherwise people don't want to play with you anymore. And if people don't want to play with you on the playground, they don't have to, because there's no teacher saying you've got to play with everybody. The playground understands its own dynamics, and the playground can be quite cruel sometimes. But the playground is a space where kids figure it out. And if kids don't get a chance to figure it out, adults don't get a chance to figure it out, we're in trouble. We're in serious trouble. Leaders need to play. There's more work being done now to actually understand how the dynamics of play affect leaders too. Leaders of all sorts, leadership of all sorts. Because at the end of the day, this capacity to be flexible, to be able to deal with difference, to be imaginative, and to try things out without the responsibility of making sure that it works the first time you do it is crucial. And as leaders, yes, there is that responsibility. People are expecting you to know what to do next. People expect you to have the solution to all their problems, never mind your problems. People expect you to have a higher intelligence, which you actually need to get from the people that you work with. Now, in a space of play, the dynamics are different. The expectation is that there is more equality on the ground. That when people come towards play, they come towards it because they know maybe they can win. Maybe this time they're going to do better than the next time. And maybe, even though they're not very good at this game, they'll improve because they'll learn from somebody else. And somebody else will help them figure out, okay, you know, when you see this happening, then you've got to try that, and if you see that happening, then you've got to try this. And you don't think about it as work because you just do it in order for the play to work, to keep the ball in the air, as it were. So for us to make space to play is not easy. It's not easy because when I Google adults at play, you can imagine the kinds of images that came up. They were all oriented towards one thing and one thing only, and that is sex. Now, happy, healthy sex is a good thing too, but I don't think it's the only form of play, because there's a lot of exploitative, abusive sex as well, of course. But this idea that adults at play means they're doing nothing is something that I think we as leaders and people thinking about leadership have seriously got to rework. To go back finally to that documentary about Afghanistan. So one of the patients at this small clinic where a very brave psychologist is trying to deal with the issues of mental health with very few facilities. One of the patients, when asked by the journalist, why have you come here to be treated? He said, I'm a father, and I keep getting irritated with my children whenever they do something, and I cannot control my temper. And so my children are now scared of me. So clearly this man, traumatized by his experiences of war, is now traumatized by the fact that his children are scared of him. And it made me wonder how he sees his role as a father, whether he sees his role as having to be the authoritarian who always has to tell his children what to do, be the good role model, set the example, and be the person that they regard in that capacity. Or can he see his role as a father as somebody whose first responsibility is to play with his children? Not abandon his responsibility, but to love them through the play that they have together, where anything they do that's irritating is absorbed through play. It made me wonder. I don't have the answer, I'm not a psychologist, but my heart went out to this man, and it made me think again. What do we think, and what do we feel, and what do we believe is our central work as leaders? Maybe it's learn to play.